This is Ashley Newby, and you're listening to the Black Studies Podcast, a Mellon Grant sponsored series of conversations examining the history of the field. Our conversations engage with a wide range of activists and scholars, senior figures in the field, late doctoral students, cultural workers, political organizers, and everyone in between in order to explore the cultural and political meaning of Black studies as an area of inquiry and its critical methods. Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Black Studies Podcast. Today, we have the pleasure of speaking with Dr. Kellie Carter-Jackson, the Michael and Denise Cullen 68 Associate Professor and Chair in the Department of Africana Studies at Wellesley College. She studies the lived experiences of Black people with a focus on slavery, abolitionism, the Civil War, political violence, Black women's history, and film. She is the author of the award-winning book, Force and Freedom, Black Abolitionists and the Politics of Violence, which won the Sher James H. Brassard Best First Book Prize. Force and Freedom was also a finalist for the Frederick Douglass Book Prize, a finalist for the Museum of African American History Stonebrook Prize, and listed among 13 books to read on African American history by the Washington Post. Carter-Jackson is also co-editor of Reconsidering Roots, Race, Politics, and Memory. Her essays have been featured in the New York Times, Washington Post, The Atlantic, The Guardian, The Los Angeles Times, NPR, and countless other outlets. She has also been interviewed for her expertise on Netflix, Apple TV, Good Morning America, CBS Mornings, MSNBC, PBS, Vox, CNE, CNN, the BBC, the History Channel, Al Jazeera, Slate, and a host of documentaries. Carter-Jackson is the historian in residence for the Museum of African American History in Boston. She also serves as a commissioner for the Massachusetts Historical Commission, where she represents the Museum of African American History in Boston. Her latest book, We Refuse, A Forceful History of Black Resistance, examines a radical reframing of the past and present of Black resistance, both nonviolent and violent, to white supremacy. She is also working on the story of the only Black passenger on the Titanic, which examines the unexplored aspect of race, migration, and our obsession with one ship thought to be supreme. Carter-Jackson loves a good podcast. She is the co-host of This Day in Esoteric Political History with Jody Abergan and Nikki Hemmer, and has served as the executive producer and host of You Get a Podcast, formerly known as Oprah-demics, the study of the Queen of Talk, by Radiotopia with Leah Wright Rigure. Hello, Dr. Carter-Jackson. Thank you so much for being on.
Hello, thank you. Thank you for having me. It's good to be here.
So we can dive in. I'm really excited to talk to you because, one, your research, but also the book itself is so timely and important in this moment. So we can put that into definite conversation with the broader field of Black studies and where we go from here. So
a lot to talk about.
This week in particular. So how did you get into Black studies and what keeps you committed to that?
I came to Black Studies when I was at Howard University. So I went there for undergrad and I majored in journalism, but I minored in African American Studies. And I absolutely loved it. Those were all my favorite classes. I changed my major a couple times because I was trying to avoid taking math classes. and I just wanted to find something where I could write, where I could research, where I could sort of dive into the archive and do the things that I love. I probably should have been a history major, but Africana Studies was just my constant. Those were all of the classes that I was taking. And then when I went to grad school, and I went to Columbia for grad school, and I studied with, Eric Foner and Manny Marable and Barbara Fields. And at the time, Columbia had not yet formalized its master's and PhD program in African studies. It had a master's, but not the PhD. Now it does. But IRIS is what they called it, like the Institute for African American Studies. I'm forgetting the whole acronym. But that's where I got a lot of like my foundational pieces in terms of like studying the field, studying who's who, learning the key scholars, learning the different debates, all of the historiography that went into that. Like there's nothing like preparing for oral examinations and reading for like a year and a half, hundreds of books, like that is, but now I look back on it, I was like, dang, I really should have appreciated that time more when I could have just sat and read Fanon all day long, those were hard times, but really transformative times in terms of thinking about Black studies for me. And then when I graduated and started getting jobs, I applied for both history departments and Africana studies departments. And it wasn't until I got to Wellesley College where I got hired to be solely in an Africana Studies department. And I absolutely love it. Like history, I see, this is going to sound so bad, but like I see history as like the plantation. And I see Africana Studies as like my maroon community. Like this is where I go. This is my safe space in a hostile world. And I consider like Africana Studies my HBCU within a PWI. Like my entire department is all Black women. That's such a rarity anywhere in the country, whether you're at an R1 or at a liberal arts where I am. To have an all Black woman department is incredible. So I feel intensely blessed, intensely lucky to be in a space that's just so affirming and so safe. And that's what Black studies has always been, I think, for all Black people, an intellectual safe space.
Thank you. I think that one, that's amazing. That it's a department full of Black women.
Yeah.
We
Love
all
it. Love
should
it.
have that in our lives.
I know. I feel even bad telling people about it. I'm like, oh, you don't have all Black people in your department? Oh, sorry. It's really special. It's really special.
For sure. And so you said that, history is one thing, and then Black studies is like your maroon community.
Mhm.
So expanding on that a little bit, being a chair of the Department of Black Studies and an endowed chair at that, how do you situate yourself in relationship to history now, the field of
Mm.
history?
I feel so liberated by Black studies. I think history is so conservative and so formulaic and does not allow, as I talk about in my book, for a much more expansive way of thinking about how we do this work and how we get our work to the people, to the public, to places where it matters. When I'm in Africana studies, I can do the work of a historian because I am a trained historian, but I can also incorporate art and I can also incorporate poetry and I can also incorporate things that sort of fall outside of the field of history, that sort of strict narrowness, and really start to tackle like other issues. Like I love that Africana studies is interdisciplinary, as it should be. We can't sort of use just one tool. We don't only have a hammer to sort of build this house. We need a variety of tools. And so in our department, I teach a lot of the history classes, but my colleague does political science. I have another colleague that does all the religion classes. We have another colleague that does all of like the social and economic courses. We just hired a Black woman who does Black Psych and looks at, the psychology of Blackness and what that means. And it's just really exciting that we have all of these different expertises and we get to bring it to the table and really give students like as best as we can, a full portrait of the Black experience. So when students take our class, they are well-rounded, they are prepared for the work that they do. And the extra boon is that when you major or minor in Africana studies, because it's interdisciplinary, there's really nothing you can't do. So we have students that go to medical school. We have students that go to law school, that go to grad school, that become teachers, that even go to corporate America, because there is nothing about the Black experience that you don't need to know in order to be prepared to do the work that you're going to. And so I'm always super proud of our students that are everywhere, like everywhere. It just shows you that, like, I don't know, I kind of feel like Africana studies is this door that opens up to just a world of opportunities. And after they take our classes, they see that. And those our classes, not to, toot our own home, but our classes are the ones that they remember the most, the ones that are most pivotal for them in their life experiences. They never forget some of the books that they've read. And that's not always the case when you're taking, English or econ or, I can't look back on a single, book that I read in like, I don't know, a sort of random English class that did the work for me that Africana studies did.
I agree. I think that when you're able to create that space for students It makes an impact, and an impact in a way that, like, for me personally was, like, why I wanted to go into the academy,
Mm,
right? It was, like, the
mm.
these professor that I had that was like, "Oh, wait, I can do this."
Yes, yes. And you had professors that like, you was smart, you was kind, you was important. Like I feel like that affirmation of taking a class and you're like, oh, this whole syllabus is me. This whole
Mhm.
syllabus is my family. This whole syllabus is like everything that I've ever wanted to know and to study. It is such an affirming experience that there are very few other disciplines that do that for students, particularly Black students. But we get white students, we have Asian majors and minors and Latino majors and minors in Africana studies, and it's a beautiful thing because it's something that everybody can have access to.
Mhm. So I wanna build on that in 2 different ways. So first, I wanna ask sort of about, um what kinds of methods you use. Like you were a trained historian, but being in Black studies, there are so many different tools, as you referenced, that are available to you. And I know that in We Refuse, like you start each chapter with your family.
Yeah, I
So
do.
that element that isn't necessarily common in history.
Yeah.
Uh, but the understanding and like incorporation of self into research is something that is more common in Black studies. But
Mhm.
what types of methods do you find to be integral to your own work?
Mm. I'm gonna sort of answer the first question first, or the second question first, and then come back to the first. So with We Refuse, every chapter starts with a different family anecdote. And part of the reason I did that was kind of twofold. One, because selfishly, I wanted to give my family their flowers. I wanted to sort of name the people that would be nameless and faceless to the rest of the world. And I wanted to be able to have an opportunity to keep saying my ancestors and my loved ones' names. You know how like in the movie Coco, they're like, you don't really die until the last person stops saying.
Mhm.
Like, I wanted to keep speaking their names. And then, second, I just believe that the idea of objectivity is a joke. Like, I think at its heart, it's racist. The idea that that you have to check yourself at the door, that you can't bring your full self to history. I don't know how to make sense of the past until I know who I am. James Baldwin has this quote where he's like, if you don't know my name, you don't know your own. And he's not saying that to be like arrogant. He's saying that because he's like, yo, you don't know Harriet Tubman. You don't know who you are. If you don't know Rosa Parks, you have no clue who you are. All Americans have no clue. Our identity is really baked into the past. And so to me, it's almost impossible to not bring yourself to the table. Every single thing I know about history has been passed down to me from my mother, from my aunties, from my grandparents, from my loved ones. And that's valuable work to me. It's not just rumor, hearsay, or, like people telling stories. It is valuable to the formation of my own identity. And so when I think about how my students come to class, they don't come to class as blank slates. They don't come to
Mhm.
class as people that have sort of no understanding of the past or who they are in it. They bring their full selves to the classroom, and that's how they make sense of it. I had a student, we were talking about the slave trade, and we were talking about the auction block and how 1 out of 3 families are separated by the auction block, and just how violent that was and the severance of that. And she said, the auction block reminds me a lot of being in foster care. And when I was pulled away from my mother, and, we had to live with strangers, and it took months before my grandmother could get custody of me. And you were so unsure and so frightened, and people didn't tell you what was going on. And it was just a really chaotic period in my life. And I'm like sitting there like, oh my gosh, how can I tell her? Don't bring your past. Don't bring yourself. Don't bring foster care. We're talking about slavery. No, because they're all connected. They're absolutely all connected. And the fact that she saw how clearly there's a through line between how we think about personhood and commodities and the foster care system was just this is the work that we do. It's the work that we do. And so, yeah, I want my students to think deeply and critically about not just what they're reading, but how it impacts who they are and who they want to be, you know? Um, and so I bring in a lot of different tools to do that. So, for instance, this semester, I'm teaching a course called Understanding American Slavery Through Film. And so we read a lot of history articles, but we watch a different film every week. We watch about 12, maybe even 14 films in total. And they're all terrible. They're all terrible. I mean, we start with Birth of a Nation, which was, it's like 110 years old, silent film. It's almost 4 hours
Mhm.
long. We do Gone with the Wind, and we do like, the Lincoln, the Django, the Amistad, the Glory, we watch a film called Burn and Way Down South, and we watch Daughters of the Dust, and we watch a documentary and all these different things. You would say, well, film has nothing to do with history. And I'm like, whoa, I don't know about that. Because I think 5 of the most powerful words in cinematic history is based on a true story. Like when we watch a film and it says based on a true story, we're like, oh, we about to watch a book. Like we think that what we're about to see is true. And we use it as either a substitute or shorthand for understanding more about the past. And so I really felt like it was important to use film to tackle, especially something like slavery, because much of what I think the public understands about slavery really does come from film and pop culture. When you think about the trope of Mammy or the faithful slave or the clan is courageous or this, idea of white women's fragility, like all of this comes from this sort of Disney presents slavery and all of its Sambo-esque characters, like, and if we're not careful, that telling, that propaganda, the tool that is film will do the whole public a great disservice if we don't tease that out and deconstruct what it is that we're watching. So film is just one of the tools that I use, but I think it's really powerful because everybody loves film. I mean, I don't know too many people that are like, I hate movies. Like I grew up in a movie watching household. We watched movies, like, and when I was a kid, it was the gateway for me for a lot of things. I mean, when I was 8 years old, my parents were like, we watching Roots. You're gonna learn today. Like, oh my God, I'm like having nightmares about Toby being whipped. Like, I'm like, I am too young for this. But like, but also when I was a kid, Gone with the Wind was my favorite movie. Like, I watched it every Christmas. I remember going to Blockbuster. The young kids don't even know what that is. Like, I remember going to Blockbuster, renting the VHS, which was a 2-pack because it was like, it was 2 VHSs because it was so long. And that is what I watched every Christmas. And then I read the book in the 6th grade. It was not until I got to Howard University and took classes that I was like, yo, Gone with the Wind is messed up. Like, you're not thinking critically when you are a kid. You're just like, oh, look at the pretty dresses. Oh, Scarlett's so beautiful. Like, and I laughed at the enslaved people. I don't know nothing about birthing no babies. Like, I thought that was hilarious. When Scarlett smacks her in the stairwell, I thought she deserves it. Like, that is how I was presented with slavery as a child. Now that makes me cringe. I'm horrified by watching those scenes. But if you don't do the work of sort of digging deeper, you won't find a problem with these really problematic films. You'll just think it's entertainment, and that's kind of the last thing it is.
Yeah. I mean, we definitely we watched a lot of Gone with the Wind in my house. It was I have my sisters who have always loved history. That was one of the films that was in rotation when we were kids. The North and South, like 8 VHS tape long miniseries.
So true. It's so so true. These young kids, they don't know the woes. They don't know the struggle. Oh,
But I
man.
think what you said is so important because, like, if unless you have that opportunity to go deeper and think more
Mhm.
critically, like, this is your picture,
Yes,
what
yes.
improvement looks like.
Oh, yes.
And
Even if you're watching something like, I remember I had a student, I was a guest lecturer in a class, and I did, the whole lecture was on Django because I think it had just come out. And the student said, "Oh my gosh, Black student, this is my favorite movie ever. I love this movie. This is the best movie ever made." I was like, "Oh, really? Okay." So I proceeded to give my lecture. And then after the lecture is over, he's like, "Damn." Like, I don't even know what to do with this. Like, can I still like this movie? Like, he was like, "This is terrible." Like, I was like, "Yes, but now that you know, now that your eyes have sort of been open, now that you are not just watching a film, but reading a film, like deconstructing
Mhm.
the film, you can think much more critically. Now it's gonna make you hella dissatisfied about everything that you watch afterwards, but nobody's gonna be able to pull, the hood over you and sort of say, like, see, this is the greatest thing. Like, and so I always get like a high off of that whenever students have like these aha moments, or when they think they love something and they realize, like, no, this is like candy, or this is a drug, and it's not like Tylenol or Motrin. This is like crack. Like, and you don't need this. You don't want this. Yeah, stuff like that is just really empowering for me. So I use film quite a bit. I use documentaries quite a lot. I've even, because I'm in Boston, I love a good field trip. I teach a course on understanding slavery and racism in the North. And
Mhm.
we go to a plantation, and students are like, "Wait, are we flying to South Carolina?" "No, we're going 30 minutes north to a town called Medford, like right next to Tufts University's plantation." We go to the Isaac Royale plantation, or right next to Tufts University's campus is the Isaac Royale plantation. And they get to see like what these spaces look like. And so to take like walking tours, to do the Black Heritage walking tour, to be in spaces where Black people lived and labored, is a different kind of approach to history, but
Mhm.
one that just layers and enriches everything about your experience. Because it's one thing to read a book, it's another thing to watch the film, and it's also another thing to go to the exact space and engage it.
Mhm.
And one of the things I love about like public history and doing this museum, the tour guide is so amazing, is that she doesn't start you in the big house, she starts you in the slave quarters. And when you're in the slave quarters, she gives you all of the history and tells you what their lives were like and how they struggled, and their life expectancy, and how difficult it was, and how violent it was, and how unglamorous it was. So that by the time you leave the slave quarters and you get to the big house, and you see the china and the silver in the kitchen, and you see the bedroom, you're like, yuck. You don't want to be in the bedroom. You don't want to be in the parlor, because you see every space in that house as a site of violence, as a site of theft. And my students have a transformative experience being in that space. It's no longer like, "Oh, look at the beautiful drapes and the china, and this is a house I would love to live in." No, they're like, this ish is haunted. Like, and let's get out. But I'm also like, no, sit with it, because this is where people had to live and
Mhm.
labor, and lost their lives here, right here. Um, and yeah, it can be rough, but it's necessary.
That having those multiple experiences and coming to history from multiple vantage points, I think is particularly important, like, right now when
Mhm,
written history is being, like, rewritten and
mhm.
looked over, and so
Man.
many of those, realities are being censored, um,
Mhm.
at multiple levels,
Yeah,
right? And
yeah.
so I think that's one of the things that really stood out to me about your book, We Refuse, is, like, understanding that there's so much nuance
Mhm,
that is not often discussed when we talk about
mhm.
Black people and their resistance strategies.
Yeah. Yeah. And that is like, it's one of my biggest frustrations, I think, is the way that we have examined Black history as this very flat, one-dimensional, um, binary of it's MLK, it's Malcolm X,
Mhm.
it's Marcus Garvey, it's Du Bois, or it's Du Bois and it's Booker T. We have these, pick your conservative or your radical, right? Like there's nobody in between, you know what I mean? And it's always a choice between men. We're never picking between women as intellectual thinkers. Nobody's like, it's Ida B. Wells or Mary Church Terrell. People aren't doing that. Like, that's not how we present these narratives. And I've just been deeply frustrated by that. And so part of my work as a scholar, as a Black studies scholar, is to like say, well, let's blow this whole thing up. Let's move beyond this like danger of the single story. Let's bring nuance back. Let's complicate this. Let's make it sophisticated. Because I think if there's one thing that my students have really taught me, especially this generation, is that binaries don't serve us.
Mhm.
It's good, it's bad, it's right, it's wrong, it's white, it's Black. Like that's just not how things function in society. Things are very messy, things are very complicated. And the idea that you could go to someone and say, here's a hammer, build a house with this one tool, no other tools. You can't really do much with just a hammer. People need all kinds of tools to construct a home you want to live in. And to really fortify it, And so We Refuse is about getting people to think about moving beyond the binary of violence and nonviolence. Like, how do we look at nonviolence and be honest and say, there are real limitations to nonviolence, real limitations. If all we have is a protest, if all we have is, the march and the hashtag, we are in danger because this whole like performance is very symbolic. It's not structural. It doesn't bring about change. Like there's a reason after the summer of 2020, people were like, that's it. So you just changed Aunt Jemima's name and you took down a statue, you changed the street name, and like that's it. We supposed to be satisfied. Like this isn't what we asked for. This is not what we asked for. We didn't get anything we demanded. We said abolish the police. Like we did not get any of those demands. And so, for me, I think part of the reasons that like marches are put forth as an option is because the public knows they're impotent. The public knows that they are not powerful. And it's like, how do we make people to think they're doing something when they're really not? Because we really don't want to change the status quo. And so in that sense, I'm like, yo, nonviolence is actually a tool of the oppressor. Like if its whole goal is to keep you impotent, then I don't want it. I don't want it. And so I remember this was like, gosh, it's like probably 11 years ago. It was when no, it's maybe more than that. This is so bad because I was like, was it when Mike Brown was killed? Was it when Oscar Grant was killed? It was when Trayvon Martin was killed. And my husband and I were living in Little Rock at the time. And it was during the summer, and we were marching in a protest. And as we're marching to like City Hall, I guess, my husband said to me, why are we doing this? And I said, what do you mean? And he said, no, what is this for? What is this gonna accomplish? And I said, oh, well, it's not actually gonna bring about change. I said, protests are public mourning. Protest is where you have solidarity. So it's not nothing. There's something about coming together. There's something about collective lament, a space where you come together and you grieve with other people. And that's what this is. This is a funeral procession, Um, and that's not important. It has value. But in terms of accomplishing the things that people want to see, the changes that people want to see, a protest is not it. On the other hand, I think, and this is where it gets a little complicated, that we also have to sort of untangle the utility of violence, or maybe better put, the utility of force. Like, how can we employ force to actually do something that does work, because I find that force is incredibly effective. And force doesn't always have to be violent, but it can be very effective. So I look at force as a boycott, as a strike, as when you hold your labor. Force can be a lot of different things, and I think that we've been afraid to say things like that. But when we look at all of the little, pinpoints along a historical timeline, that's always a moment of change. And it's almost always a moment of change that's been brought on by violence or force. So when I'm looking at a historical timeline, I'm like, the American, Revolution, the War of 1812, the Civil War, Reconstruction, Jim Crow. Like, these are all pinpoint moments of violence, not just wars like, Vietnam and things of that nature, but, riots that take like Watts, like Detroit, like Newark. Like, we pinpoint all these because they're moments of rupture that happen, that cause people or arrest people to sort of stop right where they are and reconsider, kind of the world they want to live in. And so I don't know. I think that that's something that has to be interrogated a lot more. And so, yeah, We Refuse is just about giving us more tools. I look at revolution, force, flight, protection, and joy. And I say in the book, this is not an exhaustive list. These aren't the only tools either. We don't only have 5 tools, but I had a deadline, y'all. I had to finish this book, but I could have easily added, way more tools. I could have thrown in a lot of different other things, but I wanted to talk about the things that I have seen that have worked, that have proved effective, the things I've either experienced in my own life, but also things that throughout history I've been like, look at what we did. Look at what we did. Let me show you how people had an alternative, a creative alternative. Let me show you how it worked. And that's kind of what this book is doing. And then what I hope it will also do is continue the conversation, that people will look at other ways that they can refuse and find refusal in their own methods and their own remedies, and get creative about it too. Like, really be creative.
Thank you. I think that this is definitely a wonderful place to start on this conversation and in this moment, because people are going to have to be creative, and they're going to look at what is possible outside of this binary of like protest or armed revolution. Like, those are not.
Yeah, I know. It can't just be that. So extreme. It's so extreme. You know what I mean? And that's not to say that like we can't have those options on the menu. You know what I mean? But like, I want to be able to eat a little bit more than that. So, yeah. But I also feel like this is a frustration. I'm not alone in this frustration. Like, I've been giving a ton of, book talks and lectures, and people have told me over and over again just how frustrated they are, just how, how frustrating it is to feel like you are handicapped by the options that society has put in front of you. Nobody's out here trying to go to jail. Nobody's out here trying to like physically harm people, but people do want the harm that is being enacted against them to stop. And so how do you mitigate that in ways that work, in ways that don't just feel like, well, I changed my Facebook profile to a black dot, so there you go. Or something that's just like, what? That is not the vision. That's not what it's not what we're working for.
So I'm gonna get back to my questions in a second.
Oh yeah, sorry, I know.
I think this book fits so well within like a conversation about Black studies anyway. But with what you just said, right? Like, people want, in the book you call it justice, right? Like, Black people aren't out for revenge.
Yeah.
This.
Yes. Can I just say, that's like one of my favorite lines in the book. Like, like, this is gonna sound so like, I don't know, like I'm feeling myself. I'm not. But like, every writer knows what it's like to come up with something you're like, oh, that's a banger. Oh, that'll preach. Oh, yeah. And there's just a line in the book that's like, white people are not afraid of revenge. They're not consumed with revenge. They're not afraid of revenge. They are afraid of justice.
Mhm.
They're afraid of justice because it's more costly. Like, revenge is actually like this white imaginary project. Black people aren't consumed with revenge. They are not out to get Whitey and destroy his community. That's not the goal. The goal is justice. And I think if you are a white supremacist, even if you are just, you're everyday liberal, just pushing the status quo, justice is terrifying because justice is forfeiture.
Mhm.
Justice is the loss of your power. Justice is equity. And equity means you got to redistribute that power. And people don't want to do that. They don't want to relinquish control. No one is out here afraid that Black people are going to kill them and rape them and steal their house. That's not a fear that's based on precedent. That's not a fear that's based on anything in reality. But the fear of snap, what you are asking from me requires sacrifice. If I have 10 and you have 2, we got to each get to 5. Well, then you're going to have to come up off something and that is, you're not going to get justice for free. You are not going to get justice for cheap. It will cost you. And that is what people are afraid of.
Mhm. I think that was it. I mean, it was like a banger line. Just like, yeah. No, we're not. And if you would look at history, we could be, but
We could be. We could be. And I say in the book, you've never heard of 4 white little girls killed right before service from some Black men. You have never heard of a Black man going into a white church for a prayer meeting and shooting people up. You have never heard of a Black mob attacking the U.S. Capitol. You have never seen these things. It doesn't happen. There are no white towns that are destroyed by Black mobs. There is no white Tulsa. That doesn't happen. They're not even really assassination attempts. There's JFK, RFK, they're killed by white folks. You don't have this retaliatory experience to speak of. And even when you do get close to something like a Nat Turner's Rebellion or something like that, even that's justified. You know what I mean? When you consider the millions of people that lost their lives in slavery and then the 60 people that lost their lives in this rebellion, that's not even justice, So, yeah, it's wild. It's wild.
thank you. Yeah, that part really stuck out to me. The other thing that I wanted to ask you about was as you said, you had a deadline, you had to get this in, these are really tools, but you included joy as a tool.
Mm-hmm.
So if you're going to talk about 5 tools, one of them is joy.
Absolutely.
And I would love for you to expand on the importance of that being a primary tool in refusal.
Yeah. There's another line that says, the opposite of violence is not nonviolence. The opposite of violence is the fullness of Black humanity bound together with joy. And I see joy as one of the most potent weapons that Black people have at their disposal. And I don't think joy is this superficial thing. I don't think it's, happiness and warm baths and, sea salt and all this sort of foo-foo stuff. Joy is fortification. Joy is insistence on your humanity. Joy pokes fun at whiteness. Joy is levity. It is all the things that that make me love being Black. Our humor, our music, our food, our penchant for fashion and style. It's everything that fortifies you. And you don't really have a full understanding of joy until you have lost something, until you have faced grief and grievances. And joy comes from or is perhaps tethered to sorrow, that that we need these things to be able to allow us to survive and even thrive. It's why I love the kid movie Inside Out so much, because like joy and sadness are running around together all throughout the mind. They're like, you know, two people trying to like conquer our subconscious, but like there's a reason they're paired together. And it's not just because they're opposites, it's because one informs the other. You kind of can't understand one without the other. And so, yes, so much of the Black experience is bound in trauma and hardship and violence, but also that's not the totality of us. You know, like Blackness is not just like doom and gloom. Blackness is joy and wonder and brilliance and ingenuity and all of these things. And so that chapter, I just wanted to show people like what they can do, because when I think about the chapter that precedes it is Flight, and it's
Mhm.
like this idea of the Great Migration and how Black people leave. They go to Paris, they go back to Africa, they go wherever they can find a community or belonging. And I said to my sister, you know, Flight is kind of like the least effective of the tools, because not everybody's got access to that. Not everybody's got a passport. Not everybody can just, you know, like hop on a train and go away. And, you know, where are we going to go? And my sister, and because anti-Blackness and white supremacy is global, it's
Yeah.
everywhere. You really can't go anywhere. Like you go to the continent, it is there. You go to Asia, it is there. So my sister said, we're just gonna have to go to each other's houses. And when she said that, I was like, facts. Because she was like, you know, for me, the safest place I feel when I am just like, oh, this is nice, is when I'm in my parents' home. When I go back home to Houston, Texas, and my dad is cooking and my mom has people over, it's just my sisters. There's just so much joy in being in a space where we can, you know, pour into each other's cup and eat good food and laugh and tease each other and get a reprieve, and then, you know, tap in and then get ready to tap in and go fight that good fight. But like for me, being in my girlfriend's house and drinking a glass of wine, like that's fortification. Like, and that might be what we need to do. Find these safe spaces, these maroon communities where we fill each other up, we pour into each other, we give each other joy, and then we make joy a weapon and we take it back out into the world with us. And we don't allow the world to dim our light. We don't allow the world to, you know, as the spiritual says, the world didn't give it and the world can't take it away. Like,
Mhm.
I think about that when I think about light and joy and what it means to be Black.
Thank you. I think that that was a one, like the chapter itself, but what you just said is an important reminder. Like, one, joy and sorrow go hand in hand, and you don't appreciate, fully appreciate or understand joy without that loss and sorrow. To understand like what it was, what it could be, but you found a way to get through it and have a moment or several moments of beyond happiness. Like
Yeah, 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 yeah.
more than just I'ma laugh real quick. And I think that it's so, I mean, and it's, you know, it's something that was talked about more recently. People have been talking more about Black joy and like the hashtags that came with like Black boy joy and Black girl
Yeah, yeah. Like there's, I mean, I think about, I mentioned this in the book too, like the Montgomery Brawl, you know,
joy.
like how last year, maybe 2 years ago now, all of the gifts and the memes that came out of these white voters being attacked or attacking this Black man, and all these white people and their shenanigans and Black people coming to the rescue, and just like the humor of the folding chair and like the riotous laughter of just making fun of white people, and even making fun of ourselves. Like, brother man picked up a folding chair, brother man jumped in the water, like look at Malcolm Phelps, you know, like all of this. Like there is so much like joy when it comes to how we see the world.
Mhm.
It goes back to the idea of, you know, we laugh to keep from crying. I think that's part of it too. Like we have to find the levity in it. Otherwise, we won't survive. We can't live without that. Like it's just, for me, it's more than just a hashtag or something that, like, you know, a sticker you put on your backpack or something. It is like a way of thinking about the world. One of my pastors said that joy, when things are good, joy feels like happiness. And when things are hard, joy feels like faith. And faith is this idea that things aren't great now, but you believe that they will be. You have hope, you have a promise, you have a purpose, and all is not lost. And even in hard times, that is where I see joy the most. Not just at the cookout or the birthday party, but I see joy the most when things are really difficult. And that's why that Montgomery Ball is so like symbolic, because it's a violent altercation. I mean, it's a brawl. It is an all-out brawl. And
Mhm.
yet there is something very joyful about it that cannot be denied. That cannot be denied. And I absolutely love it. I'm like, we need to make this a holiday. This is a holy day.
Yeah. I mean, I think that I saw stuff about the anniversary of it and,
Yeah.
all of the shirts and the earrings
Yes.
and the accessories that came out of it. Like, I definitely think like Black people have a talent for finding the joy in
Mm-hmm. And then I found out, did you know a Black man invented the folding chair? A man by the name of Nathaniel Alexander in 1911 patented like the folding chair. And I was like, of course we invented the folding chair. Like, of course we did. It just, even that to me is just like, I don't know, very, very poetic.
Absolutely. So I want to be respectful of your time. And as much as I want to ask you about these other chapters, I'm going to ask I want to ask you there's two questions that I have left. Um so what interests you most about the past of Black studies? Both in like what makes you excited, but also in maybe what things can we critique or
Mm.
yeah.
Mm. Gosh, I think what makes me most excited or proud of the past of Black studies is like what we did with what we had. You know, like when I think about what was available to the abolitionists, because that's what my first book was about, how like they're 1% of the population, they're a very, very small group. And what they did with the tools they had was just incredible to me. Like, they made the pen their sword. They're like, you know what's the most powerful thing we could do? Tell our story. Frederick Douglass writes his Narrative in the Life of a Slave. Harriet Jacobs writes Incidents in the Life of a Slave Girl. These are like best sellers. They understood the power of the written word. They understood what it meant to be able to tell a story, to make it plain, to put it out there. They published newspaper after newspaper. They understood the power of the press and what it meant to inundate people with all the news they possibly could about what was happening. They did not have much at all. I mean, the abolitionist movement was not a wealthy movement. It was not a movement for moneyed people. They knew they had to sacrifice. They knew they had to scavenge. They had to scrape the bottle of whatever they could get and help people and save people and work to dismantle an institution that no one thought would be
Mhm.
possible. And they put their lives on the line, not just during the movement, but even during the Civil War. Like, I marvel at that. I marvel at like people who are in, the 1890s and 1910s and 1920s, people like Du Bois. It's like, you know what we need? We need a whole new history of Reconstruction. I'm about to write it. Here's 800 pages. Like, and I don't care if the AHA won't acknowledge it. Like, we doing this. And I think about all the people that was like, whether this gets accepted into the academy, whether this is canonized or not, we are writing our own stories. We are doing our own work. I mean, I have a really good friend, Ashley Dennis, who's writing about these Black women intellectuals that created their own canons, that created their own textbooks for Black children. They
Mhm.
created storybooks for Black children. I mean, they were like, if we can't find it, we'll make it ourselves. Like, that is what Black studies is to me, like making a way out of no way. And I just, even HBCUs, like, who are chronically underfunded, how much they navigated with what they had and created giants, beacons of Black people that just transform the nation. Like, I can't get over that. I can't get over the contributions of people that did so much with so little.
Mhm.
And in much more horrific times. Don't get me wrong, I'm not a fan of the times we're living in right now, but this is not slavery. It is not the nadir yet. It is not it is not what they were up against. And yet they created, and yet
Mhm.
they wrote, and yet they did all of these things. Yeah. Now there's some real critiques, for sure. Like, they weren't always talking about women. They weren't always intersectional, They didn't always sort of have I guess you could say, the more progressive language that we have now about how to sort of think about some of these things. But Black women did. I mean, you got people like Frances Ellen Watkins Harper that is like writing about, she's not calling it intersectionality, but she's writing about those things in the 1800s.
Mhm.
So people are still thinking that their Black brethren are not doing much of that. But yeah, there's always going to be room for improvement. But still, I don't know that I know that I could not be who I am now 100 years ago.
Yeah, I think, in what you said about how, like, they were doing this work up against things that we are not facing.
No. No.
And but they left that blueprint though. And so, like, we can look back and we can see, like, okay, this is how the work operates under these conditions.
Mhm.
And these
Mhm.
are strategies for survival and strategies for moving forward and strategies for maintaining that record,
Yeah.
uh, that I think is so important, in this moment.
I don't think Du Bois thought 100 years from now, people are going to be reading Black Reconstruction and quoting it like it's the Bible. You know what I mean? Like, I don't think he thought that, or maybe he did. I don't know. Du Bois is kind of arrogant, but like, but I marvel at how the things that people created are still usable. Like,
Mhm.
still very much usable. Like, I look at some of the stuff that white scholars put out 100 years ago. I'm like, this racist trash. Can't nobody use this. Like, but Frederick Douglass is still usable. Like, I still teach Instance in the Life of a Slave Girl in my classes, on my syllabus every semester. When I do Black women's history, when I do women in slavery, we are reading Harriet Jacobs. Like, the fact that her work is timeless says a lot about the world they created.
Mhm. So building on that, what interests or excites you most about the future of
Mm.
Black studies?
Listen, these are hard times. These are hard times. I'm like, what excites me? I don't know. Like, I mean, I am trying, and listen, I'm an optimist. You know what I mean? I'm a glass half full kind of girl. Like, I'm a rose colored glasses. I like to see things like, not as everything's like unicorns and lollipops, but I am a hopeful, joyful person. That is just how I'm bent. That is my makeup. And
Mhm.
so I will say that I am excited about refusal. I'm excited about how people are refusing to obey,
Mhm.
refusing to kowtow, that this generation and the generation coming after give no F's about white people and their feelings. Like, about, performing or pulling up pants, or, it's like, listen, I'm gonna live my life. You can be mediocre and basic, I'm gonna be mediocre and basic. That's the liberation, being mediocre and basic. Like, because I'm like, I get Black excellence, but that ish kills us. You know what I mean? We go to
Yeah.
early graves trying to prove that we are, equal to white folks or superior to white folks. Like, I don't want to play those games. Like, I just want to be able to live my life. And there's something very freeing about not being encumbered by proving why you need to exist. And I think for decades, Black studies spent, and is still spending, a good amount of its energy showing why we matter.
Mhm.
And I want to get to a point where we just do. We just do. And no explanation needed. Unapologetic. Like, and I think those are things that excite me. I think the second thing that I'm also a little bit, I mean, this is kind of my mission, and I don't know who's coming with me, but I am all about the work of doing Malcolm X and making it plain. Like, make it plain. When you write these books, when you do this work, make it accessible.
Mhm.
The public can't digest it, then you're not doing it right. Like, this woman came up to me and said, I loved your book. I really, really enjoyed it. And I don't want to insult you, but I just want to thank you because this book was it was easy. It was easy to read. And I said, that is not an insult. That is a high compliment. I want my work to be accessible and easy to read. I don't want you, I mean, I want you to sit with it. I want you to think, you know what I mean? I want it to sort of like push you. But if you're confused, I'm not doing my job. You know what I mean? If it's so complicated and so like theoretical that it serves no public purpose, then I don't think that we are accomplishing our goals. So my work will probably be going forward much more public facing, and that's not because it's like I think some of that gets diminished because people are like, oh, fame, celebrity. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about the work of public history, the work of museums, the work of either podcasting. I mean, there's something very democratic about a podcast, like I don't have to necessarily open up a book. I can sit, I can listen, I can do it while I'm doing something else. I can engage. Like, that accessibility is so powerful. And I think if there's one thing that the right has gotten right or understands very clearly, is that the public cannot handle like really big, convoluted, abstract ideas. And it makes them feel dumb and inadequate, and they hate that ish. And so it is very easy to say anti-DEI because people are like, how do you spell equity? You know what I mean? Like, what is inclusion, diversity? What diversity, equity, inclusion? Too much. It's too much. Like, and I'm like, yo, we have got to make it plain. If we just talked about belonging, like, we want to cultivate belonging. Everybody wants to feel safe. Everybody wants to be on a college campus and feel like they belong. Like, everyone wants to take a class and see themselves on the syllabus. You know what I mean? Like, and understand how their contributions to this country matter. Like, you don't have to make it, like, I get critical race theory for like, the scholars. I get it. But if you want this work to translate to the public, you better take it back to kindergarten. You better talk about sharing. You better talk about belonging. You better talk about sharing your snacks with the class. You better make it plain, because if you don't, we are in danger. And there is a huge anti-intellectual movement. It's not just about anti-DEI. It is about anti-learning. Like, people don't want to be properly informed. They don't even want to be informed. Like, and if we don't figure out a way to strategize how we are going to simplify and make accessible our work, we are not just going to be forgotten. We're going to be hated. And we're going to be hated because people don't like things they don't understand. They don't appreciate things they don't understand. And that's very basic. Like, I didn't like I don't know, like abstract art. I would go into a museum and I'm like, my daughter could have made this. I could have made this, da, da, da. And then when someone is like, actually, no, let me show you how to break it down, like why this makes sense and why this is actually more complicated than this, and this is what this means, and then I was like, oh, okay, I can appreciate that. Okay, that's dope. Actually, that's dope. But like, we don't do that. We don't explain. We don't include. We don't make people feel empowered by what they're seeing. We make them feel stupid. And that's counterproductive. So I don't know how we do this in, scholarship, because the scholarship is like still very conservative, but like, I don't understand the value of writing to 15 people. I don't understand the value of spending 15 years or 10 years on a book that will be read by 62 people. Like, that's just bananas to me. Like, I can't make it something that my grandmother, my aunties, my homeboy could read and appreciate. Then I'm failing them. And not only am I failing them, but I'm in service to white supremacy. Like, right? Now that sounds like whoa, but I'm for real. I'm for
No,
real.
that's
Like, so so that is the work that I'm trying to do through my writing, through podcasting, through teaching, through anything public facing that I do. It's got to have the greatest impact possible. The greatest impact possible. I'm no longer interested in doing things that don't have big impact. The stakes are too high. The stakes
yeah.
are too high.
Well, thank you so much. When you talk about like accessibility and language, and like those are things that are definitely near and dear to my heart. And thinking about like, okay, who can actually read this though?
Especially in grad school, man. I don't know if you felt, but like in grad school, I felt dumb all the time. I felt dumb because people would
Mhm.
be using these really big words, and I would be like, I know I have a PhD, but why do I feel dumb? Like, and you're like, someone's like, the epistemological opacity, and I'm like, what what opacity? Wait, what? Just say you can't see it. Like, what's opacity? Like, just make it plain. Like, so yeah, and maybe that's just me and my
No.
upbringing, but I think if people are really honest, they use that as a tool to make you feel inferior,
Yeah.
to make you feel like you don't belong. And if I'm here, then I belong. If I'm at the table, then I belong. If I'm on the campus, then I belong. And we're all in the classroom, K through 12, whatever. We're all in the classroom. We all belong. So let's do the work of making everyone feel like they are included.
Yeah. Yeah. And that allows for more conversation
Mm-hmm.
and the possibility of critique in a way that if only 15 people can understand what you're saying,
Mm-hmm.
you don't have that accountability piece that I think is
Yes.
so necessary for where we are right now and where we may or may not be headed. Like, you have to have that.
Yeah.
Collaboration, community, and accountability are going to be necessary.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. Because the people that do that kind of work are more often than not the gatekeepers. And that's what makes it so difficult to open the door wider for all.
Mhm. Well, thank you so
Thank
much.
you. This was my pleasure. This was great. This was fun. Anytime. I'm like can I just say I'm a huge fan. Like, huge fan. Like, when I saw this podcast, I was like, what? Oh my gosh. Subscribe. So y'all are doing the Lord's work, as they say. And I'm here for it. So thank you so much.
Thank you for being here. Thank you for writing this book. Like, I really can't imagine a better time for this book strategies. I'm like, okay, let me think about how we're going to integrate this class because my students need to know.
Love it. I absolutely love it. Thanks.
Anything you want to add or end on?
I can't think of anything. I think we probably covered it. I can't think of anything else. Free Palestine. And keep hope alive.
Yes. Thank you so much again for your time and your wisdom and your book. And I hope that as we dive into this semester and these next several years, that we all can we can remember what resistance and refusal can look like and not try to operate on a binary that creates false options.
Yes and amen.
Thank you so much. Enjoy the rest of your day.
You too. Bye.
Bye.